I really appreciate being here. It's a pleasure, and it's always nice to discuss the industry that I love. Yesterday, I was reviewing some of the emails that Bill and I shared in the spring when we were originally discussing possible dates for my discussion. And quoting myself from that email exchange, I wrote Bill the following on April 10th, when the world had been flipped entirely upside down by the pandemic. Quote, "If you could keep this between the two of us, I'd appreciate it, but we've experienced a monumental decline in our business over the past month. We're currently waiting on confirmation that we will receive a PPP loan from the federal government. To be perfectly frank, if that loan doesn't come through, it's unlikely that Eagle newspapers will survive. I should know more within the next couple of weeks. Given how crazy my schedule has been and the considerable question marks regarding the future of the business, I think it's wise that I wait at least a few weeks before speaking in front of the group. That time should provide me with some additional clarity about my schedule as well as our business prospects." End quote. I apologize that it's taken me a little over 5 months to make good on the invitation, but I'm not sure I could have provided a very uplifting or enlightened discussion back then, so I appreciate the reprieve. I'll talk a little more about the impact of COVID-19 on our industry in a little while, but first I thought I'd share a little history of our newspapers, give you some background on how our newspapers and local journalism in general has changed, and talk a little bit about the impact of social media, and then we'll talk about the current state of affairs for local news. I joined Eagle News in 1993, 1 year after the company was formed through the merger of Manlius Publishing, which was operated by George Wortley, who I'm sure many of you knew, and Brown Newspapers, which was operated by Dick Manville up in Baldwinsville. The new company, Eagle Newspapers, had 3 papers in Madison County and 8 newspapers in Onondaga County. Looking back at some of the newspapers from that era, it's obvious how good things were in this industry in the early 90s. Our papers were thick, 2-section broadsheets. While there was almost no color in the paper, the advertisers were willing to pay high rates for large black and white ads. There was a variety of businesses in most of the communities we covered, from independent grocers to clothing stores to independent car dealerships, all of which were advertising in the newspaper. It was for that reason also that massive newspaper chains were buying up daily newspapers around the country, creating large media conglomerates. In the weekly newspaper world, there were also a lot of mergers taking place, as tiny independent weeklies found themselves the target of ever larger regional groups. Eagle Newspapers was no different. Our publisher in the 90s, Stu Hancock, who again, most of you folks probably knew, envisioned a company that had newspapers across upstate New York. In those early years, Eagle purchased the Spotlight newspapers in the Albany market and started a group of weeklies in the Binghamton market. We also launched 4 additional papers in the greater Syracuse market, in Oneida, Hamilton, Solvay, and finally in the city of Syracuse. By the year 2000, Eagle Newspapers had 15 newspapers in central New York, 10 in the capital region, and 4 in the Binghamton area. My own role in that expansion is pretty limited. I came to Eagle with visions of spending a couple of years cutting my teeth at the community news level before eventually making my way to the Boston Globe, where I'd be the next great beat writer for my beloved Boston Red Sox. But when I met Stu, he granted me the interview because we were both Colgate guys. He told me they didn't need any more sports reporters, but if I wanted to, I could go cover the DeWitt Town Board meeting that night. And so my sports journalism dream died before it ever really got started. But it didn't take me long to fall in love with community news and the communities that we serve. This is and forever will be my home, and I thought then, and still feel today, that the work we do is important. For several years, I spent at least a couple nights a week scribbling notes from the audience of town board or school board meetings across Onondaga and Madison County. And for many years, I ran a newsroom in Syracuse, coaching my staff in the art of community journalism. There were a lot of all-nighters on Sunday and Monday nights as we prepared the newspapers for press. And I worked with a lot of good young people many of whom have taken what they learned at Eagle and gone on to their version of the Red Sox beat writer job, something that I'm really very proud of. Great people that I've worked with. As the 1990s turned to the 2000s, things in our communities began to change, and with it came change in the health of our newspapers. If you look at an Eagle newspaper from 25 years ago and a newspaper from today, you'll find that most of the advertisers from 1993 or 1995 or 1997, they're just gone. There's no more local shoe stores. Almost all of the community grocery stores faded out many years ago into the Tops chain or the Price Chopper chain, or they went belly up altogether. Local drugstores like Harvey's, who was a reliable advertiser, they became an Eckerd, and then a Rite Aid, and now a Walgreens. Dozens of local auto dealers, Jay's Village Chevrolet in Fayetteville. They all got swallowed up into the drivers' villages and Romanos and Fusillos and Summits. And the local hospitals, they merged and they brought family practice groups from across central New York into their respective folds. The inventory of available advertisers out there today is so remarkably different than it was 25 years ago. It's just had a huge impact on our business. Consolidation among our clients and potential clients has been the biggest driver of advertising revenue loss for Eagle News, and the same is true for newspapers across the country. This consolidation, along with the pressure applied to local retailers by the substantial increase in online spending, has dramatically altered the local advertising landscape. Yes, some of the local advertising dollars have gone into digital advertising solutions. Most, however, have disappeared altogether or gone into national data-driven advertising campaigns driven by 20-somethings on Madison Avenue. I'd argue that one of the best ways to ensure the health of your local newspaper is to buy local. Spend your money with the local companies that make up our Main Street corridors. They need your business, and we need theirs. I think the modern history of Eagle News probably began in 2009, which is the year following the beginning of the Great Recession. In the beginning of that year, in the midst of the financial downturn and at a particularly low point in the history of Eagle News, the investors who owned the papers made it clear that they either wanted to sell the business or shut it down. With my personal job security and the future of these historic newspapers at risk, I worked with two other partners and we bought Eagle newspapers in Syracuse and Spotlight News in Albany. I became publisher of Eagle, and my partner, John McIntyre, became the publisher of Spotlight News. Our third partner, Dan Alexander, runs Sun Community News in the Adirondacks and operates the printing facility where our newspapers are produced. In the past decade, we've worked to modernize the company and strengthen the circulation of the publications. To a degree, that meant concentrating our efforts in the areas that we felt could still support a community newspaper, and leaving those areas that could no longer do so. In some areas, we merged papers in neighboring communities. For instance, the DeWitt Times and Eagle Bulletin merged under the Eagle Bulletin flag. And now, after all of that is done, our portfolio includes 5 community weekly newspapers in the Syracuse suburbs. In 2012, we moved away from a paid subscription model and adopted a free requested model, meaning that if someone sends us a postcard or goes to our website and signs up for a subscription, we'll send them a newspaper for 3 years. This model has allowed us to consistently grow our print audience at a time when most newspapers are facing circulation declines. Numbers are down slightly in 2020 because of a decline in pickups on the racks during the pandemic. But in 2019, Eagle News had more subscribers than at any time in our history, which bucks the trend of newspapers across the country. In 2011, we launched Syracuse Woman Magazine, which has become a flagship product for us. And we have several other publications that we produce, either for customers or for a niche audience. We've also jumped with both feet into the digital publishing sphere. That's hard to say. We have several websites that correspond with our publications, as well as partnerships for a real estate site, community-based email marketing lists, and an active engagement on social media. And through these many changes, we've tried to be true to our roots. When I started in 1993, it was the mission of our company to provide our readers with a compelling and accurate accounting of the events that take place in the communities we serve, and to provide our customers with a cost-effective means of advertising their goods and services. Although the platform has changed over time, that mission remains very much the same. I like to think of our company as a vehicle for connections. If you're looking for a specific product or service from a local provider, my hope is that you can find what you're looking for in my newspapers. If you're wondering what to do this weekend with your family, I want the Eagle Bulletin's calendar of events to be the place that you turn for ideas. And if you want to know what your town government or school district is doing with your tax dollars, or even if you don't want to know that, I want you to be able to find that information in our newspapers. As a history major in college, I also enjoy that our newspapers are and have been the historical record for some of the communities we serve for more than 200 years. Very few businesses can say they were relevant in the early 1800s and remain relevant today. But some newspapers, including a couple of ours, have been woven into the community's fabric for more than 2 centuries, which is a legacy I'm very proud of, and I'm terrified of screwing that up. But another large role we play in the communities we serve is that of a cheerleader. We want to make sure that the people in the community that are doing great things get the recognition they deserve. Stu Hancock had a couple of mantras that he would repeat often. The first was that community journalism is all about names and faces. He called it refrigerator journalism. Dean's List announcements, sports accolades, Eagle Scout ceremonies, school achievements, ribbon cuttings, community service awards. Anything that a grandparent or a parent can clip out and place under a magnet on the refrigerator door. Those are the things that we want to have in our newspapers. Stu's second mantra was that the front page is for us, the journalists, and the rest of the newspaper is for them, the readers. On the front page, he wanted us to publish the stories that we in the newsroom think are important to inform the community, the hard news. The rest of the newspaper should be chock full of names, faces, achievements, events, and the like. It's a formula that's worked for decades, and it can still work, but it takes the support of the community as well as a profitable company to support the journalists and backroom staff that make it happen. Obviously, there's been a lot of news about the financial challenges facing newspapers. It's very true that this is an industry that faces challenges on a number of fronts. But here's a few facts that are somewhat underplayed. As of July 2018, there were 7,000 weekly newspapers in the United States and 1,400 daily newspapers. The average circulation of a weekly newspaper in America is 8,125, which is slightly larger than most of my newspapers. Total weekly readership of community newspapers in America is more than 150 million, meaning nearly half of Americans read a newspaper each week. Among these 150 million readers, the average amount of time spent reading a community newspaper is 38 minutes. And our readers seem to genuinely enjoy the community newspaper experience. In a readership survey conducted last July by the National Newspaper Association, 90% of readers responded that their weekly newspaper did a good job informing them of what was going on in their community. 73% said their hometown paper provides them with valuable shopping and advertising information. So we're an industry with 150 million loyal and satisfied customers who like the product and feel it fills a need in their lives. But despite this, community newspapers, including Eagle News, and many of the publishers I know really well, still face a massive uphill climb. So what happens when a newspaper goes away? Before the pandemic began, there were 1,600 communities across the United States that have lost their community newspaper in the past decade. I know of several more that have been unable to navigate their way through the pandemic and have gone out of business in recent months. Some of these newspapers are weeklies like ours. Many are in small dailies centered around cities with populations in the 10,000 to 25,000 range. A recent study conducted by CityLab, which analyzed data from 203 counties formerly served by these newspapers, found that within 3 years of a newspaper closure, the average bond rating for that community began to drop and the cost of borrowing began to rise. Why? Because without anybody there to document and publicize the municipality's actions, municipal leaders were less likely to be responsible with taxpayer money. And attempts by these municipalities to reach out and inform their readers of what they're up to largely go unheeded. According to the National Newspaper Association, 80% of Americans have never visited a municipal website. And those that do, they're more likely to be there to find out whether or not they can take their garbage out on Columbus Day or not. They're certainly not there to read and analyze the minutes of last week's planning board meeting or town board meeting. Most have never been to a meeting of their local government. And in New York, with its goofy and antiquated system of towns, villages, hamlets, etc., many don't even know what municipality they live in. Without news agencies, whether that's print, digital, radio, or TV, documenting what happens at town hall, Americans in general have shown they're unwilling to do it for themselves. But beyond the government watchdog role, I'm also very concerned that the decline in print newspaper circulation has also led to a decline in our political discourse. When I started in this business, most Americans received a daily newspaper in their home each day, and many also received at least one paid community weekly. Intelligent people can debate whether the opinion pages were slanted in one political direction or another, but the news coverage in those papers gave most people a solid understanding of the underlying facts behind any issue. Today, a large percentage of Americans get their information from one-sided, quote-unquote, news sources that speak only to their point of view, whether that's on TV, radio, or Facebook. It's my opinion that this has added to today's us versus them political discourse that is as unhealthy as any time in my life. So that brings us to the current state of affairs for Eagle News during the era of COVID-19. In the middle of March, when everything began to shut down, about 60% of our advertising base disappeared within a week. As an essential business, we remained open, but we were forced to make some pretty draconian changes in both our staffing and in the way we produced our newspapers to counter these losses in revenue. We also applied for and thankfully received the PPP loan that frankly kept us alive. Without that loan, I'm quite certain that we would not be publishing today. In the last few months, advertising revenues have rebounded somewhat, but we're still trending at about 30 to 35% down from 2019 levels, with overall revenues down about 25%. There have been bright spots, however. A couple of major bright spots. One is that our readers have responded very generously. Earlier this year, we changed the way that our renewal notices went out, where we asked for contributions from those who were willing to make one, and our readers have responded extremely generously. Frankly, the response has been wonderful and very, very humbling. The second bright spot has been that our staff reductions, which aren't a bright spot, have required me to get my butt out from behind my desk and go out and cover some news in this community. And so I've been the primary reporter for the Eagle Bulletin's coverage area during this period. It's been a long time since I've spent as much time reporting on local news, and that's why I got into this business in the first place, because I love that. It's been a refreshing change, and I've been encouraging some of my publisher friends in the business to get their butts out from behind their desks and do a little reporting of their own. And I think it will make them feel better about this business that we've chosen. So, before I put any of you guys to sleep, I'd like to sum up by stating that I believe newspapers have been and continue to be integral to the health of the communities that we serve. Newspapers have a big role to play in their own future by creating informative, attractive, and useful news presentations and getting them delivered in a timely manner. But you as readers also play a role, both by submitting news items and tips to help us do our jobs and by using your dollars locally to support businesses that support us.